What is the Nevada Policy Research Institute? We are a public policy think tank, which doesn't really tell you anything. So what does a think tank do? What are we about? We are about private solutions to public challenges because we want to give ideas and information that empower people. Now, we do that in a lot of ways. One of our most successful sites is called Transparent Nevada, and transparentnevada.com. If you go there, you can look up the compensation package of almost every government employee in the state. You can tell how much they're making, what year they made it in, and what that does is that allows you as a citizen, it allows lawmakers to go and cut through the rhetoric and just say, you know, what's actually happening? How much are these folks actually making? And then make judgments based on those types of facts. So we do policy research, we do some investigative reporting, we also do some litigation. And today I want to talk to you about what's going to be a really big issue in the upcoming 13 months, the margin tax. So first things first, who has heard of the margin tax? Who feels like they have a good understanding of the margin tax? Well, I have good news. That just makes you a normal human being, because these types of debates start very early in the political world. But you know, people have lives, they have interests. You guys are helping out a lot of clients throughout the city. So I want to give you an overview of what the margin tax is about. The margin tax is going to appear on the November 2014 ballot. So 13 months from now, you will be voting on what's called the Education Initiative, but what is really a new margin tax for the state of Nevada. There's a lot of different ways the government takes in money. Currently, we've got a sales tax. We've got the modified business tax, as was mentioned earlier. Other states will have personal or corporate income taxes. The margin tax is substantially different from all of those. The margin tax is a modified gross receipts tax, which means it's assessed on a business's revenue, not their profits. So that's the first thing. It's a modified gross receipts tax, and so it's assessed on how much money a business takes in, not how much money a business makes. Now, there are three exemptions that you can take to reduce your margin tax liability. So say as a company you bring in $10 million, you can look at that and say, okay, I'm not going to pay taxes on all $10 million. And I should say, again, that's not profit, that's just revenue. You still have to pay all of your expenses, all of your employees, all of your capital costs out of that money. So you can say, okay, I'm either going to do 70% of that $10 million, and the margin tax is going to be assessed on that. Or I can deduct all of my payroll cost, or I can deduct something called cost of goods sold. That's a really complicated definition I don't have time to really get into, but that's the third type of deduction. So for the average business, you're going to basically take 70% of your revenue, and you're going to pay a 2% tax on that. Does that kind of make sense, that you basically have total revenue times 70% times 2%, and that is your tax bill. Now, what you'll hear is, oh, this is just a tax on big business. It's not a tax on small businesses, because if a business has less than $1 million in revenue, they won't have to pay the tax. Now, that's very true, but as we'll see, $1 million in revenue is actually not that much. But first, I want to answer the question of how did we get here? The margin tax doesn't just come around by accident. Something had to happen to put it on the ballot. So in 2012, the Nevada State Education Association, the Nevada State Education Association gathered signatures, spent about $600,000 getting an initiative, enough signatures to put an initiative on the ballot. Now, the initiative process in Nevada is pretty unique. If you gather enough signatures to put the margin tax on the ballot, it first has to go to the legislature in the next session, and they have 40 days to either enact it or to let it go to a vote. So 2012, the teachers union gathers these signatures. 2013, the legislative session starts, and the legislature has 40 days to act on it, and they hold a hearing, but they refuse to take a vote. So that means it's going to go on the ballot in 2014. So this is a teacher union-backed initiative. So as I was saying, one of the things you'll hear is that, oh, it's only going to affect businesses with more than $1 million in revenue. So who here thinks $1 million is just a lot of money? So you guys understand, if you're a business, $1 million in revenue is only less than $2,800 in revenue per day, and that's not profit, that's revenue. So if as a gas station, if as a restaurant owner, if as a insurance advisor, you are bringing in $1 million in revenue each year, the tax is going to apply to you. And from what I can see in reading the initiative, there's no you don't get an exemption for your first $1 million in revenue. The tax starts right away. So you will hear a lot that, oh, it's only on these big businesses, it's only on them. But $1 million in revenue, there's a big difference between that and $1 million in profit. And if you look at businesses like a retail business, your profit margin oftentimes is only 2% or 5%. I know someone in a printing business, their profit margin, he said, is between 5 and 10%. So when you start talking about a company that's doing $10 million in revenue but is only making $50,000 in profits, all of a sudden the tax looks a little different. And that's because you have a lot of businesses that are revenue rich. They're a large business, but they are income poor. Which means they're spending a lot of money but not necessarily making a lot of money. And one of the best ways to illustrate this, and one of the big problems with the margin tax, is that if you're a business that's losing money, and say you've got $10 million in revenue, but you lost $500,000 last year, you're still going to pay the margin tax. That's because the margin tax affects how much money you bring in, not how much money you make. I was talking with a business owner recently, and he said there was a business that had gone out of business, laid about 15 employees off. He and his business partner invested $500,000 in this business 2 years ago. They were able to bring all the former employees back on. The first 18 months of running the business, they were learning the business. They lost another $200,000, as they expected. You don't just turn things around instantaneously. He said, as of November, I was able to offer health insurance to my employees. Our cash flow improved. We're doing better. But if the margin tax had been in place, it would have cost us another $90,000 on top of the $200,000 they were already losing, and it would have put me out of business. So when you think about the margin tax, remember that if there is a business that's losing money but has over $1 million in revenue, they're still going to be paying this tax. This isn't like a corporate income tax where it's only a tax on your profits. It's a tax on how much you bring in, not how much you make. And this business owner told me that if the margin tax passes in 2014, he's going to have to cut health insurance for his employees because he can't afford it, and he still is going to have tens of thousands of dollars and other expenses he's going to have to try and figure out how to eliminate. Normally they don't like you to do math in presentations, but I know you guys work with numbers all the time. So let's just calculate the margin tax. Say you're a business, you've got $3 million in revenue. You just take the standard 70% of your income, so you get a 30% deduction. That means your taxable, I shouldn't have said income there, I apologize. It's just a taxable revenue is $2.1 million. Your margin tax bill is going to be $42,000. Now that may not sound like a lot, but let's think about that. This is a state business tax climate index. It's done by the Tax Foundation. They do just a terrific job of analyzing just kind of the numbers of the taxes in different states. And who here thinks Nevada has got a better business tax climate than California? Anyone think that Nevada has a better business tax climate? Well, you would be right, and the Tax Foundation confirms it here. We are ranked number 3. California is ranked number 48. And one of the reasons California ranks so poorly is that they have got an 8.8% corporate income tax. That's on top of the federal income tax, but if you're a corporation in California, you're going to pay an 8.84% corporate income tax. So how would the margin tax compare? Now it's different because it's not a income tax because you're paying it even if you don't make money. So let's take that same business, $3 million in revenues, and let's look at it and let's say, all right, if you've got a 10% profit margin, so you're making $300,000, the margin tax is going to cost you $42,000. That's a comparable income tax rate of 14%. if you're in a retail business, if you're in a gas station, and your profit margin is only 5%, same tax bill, even though your profits are only $150,000, and that's a comparable corporate income tax rate of 28%. If you get down lower, obviously it can go up to 70. It can even go up to over 100%, because even if you're losing money, the margin tax is going to apply. So I don't know how many of you work with businesses or work with firms, but if they start asking questions about the margin tax and how will this affect me as a business, well, unless your profit margin is 15.8%, you would be better off doing business in California in a comparison between the corporate income tax and the margin tax, if the margin tax passes next November. So, one thing businesses look to cut cost, when there's a new bill, is in benefits a lot of times, and that's certainly something that we've seen in other states that have done this, but something I would certainly predict for Nevada. So, California is always held up as this terrible place to do business, and one of the reasons is they've got one of the highest corporate income taxes rates in the country. But if Nevada passes the margin tax, unless your business is just killing it and making close to 16% profit margin, you would be better off doing business in California, which I think is really something a lot of people don't think about. Any questions on that? Is that making sense? Yeah. If you have over $1 million in revenue, it will affect you. Yes. Pass-through income is not going to be considered. So if it's I'm trying to think how to define it. I think they say passive business activity. So if it just flows through like that, it shouldn't be considered as taxable income. That's correct. That's correct. So it's not, and that's a very good point. There are a lot of problems with it, but I don't want to make it sound worse than it is. And some of the other problems with it are structural. We can have a lot of discussion or debate on how much money does the government need? Is the government spending the money it has properly? And that's a very important discussion. And certainly there's a lot to discuss there, and probably a lot of varying opinions even in this room. But some of the biggest problems with the margin tax is not about that it raised taxes, or is not about how much money it's going to take out of the private sector and put into the hands of government. It's just in the way the margin tax is structured. And so this is a little technical, but I think it's important, and I know you guys can handle it. So what the margin tax does is, unlike a sales tax, where it's only applied to the end consumer, you only pay the sales tax once. A margin tax can be assessed multiple times through the production of a good. For instance, take this podium. How did this podium get here? Well, there's a company that cuts the lumber. If a different company processes the lumber, that's two companies involved, a third company manufactures, a fourth designs, a fifth is the wholesaler, and a sixth is the retailer. That's 6 times the margin tax will be applied to this product. In comparison, if you're one company and you do all of those things in-house, there's only one time where it's going to be applied. And so one of the things when you're looking at tax policy is you don't want the tax policy to impact how businesses are doing, whether a business is small or whether they consolidate, whether they use human capital or physical capital. And so one of the big structural problems with the margin tax is that depending on the type of business you are, you could be at a significant competitive disadvantage compared to a competitor who has a lot of the, if you're just one step in the process compared to a company that does all 6 steps in the process, they're going to have a significant competitive advantage over you because they're only going to be paying the tax once. For instance, the Tax Foundation, the folks I referenced earlier, who do a lot of the tax policy research, say margin tax is a badly designed business profits tax combining all the problems of minimum income taxation in general, excessive compliance and administrative cost, and penalization of unsuccessful businesses, undesirable incentives, doubtful equity basis with those of taxation according to gross receipts. There's no sensible case for gross receipts taxation or modified gross receipts taxation. The old turnover taxes, typically adopted as desperation measures in fiscal crisis, were replaced with taxes that created fewer economic problems, like a sales tax. Gross receipts tax do not belong in any program of tax reform. So, what I'm saying here is that even if you think, look, we've got to raise taxes for whatever reason, a margin tax, just the way it's structured, is a really bad way to raise that money. So what it would do is it would kind of encourage people to consolidate instead of being in one independent business. Now, what you'll hear backers of the margin tax say is, Texas has a margin tax, and Texas is doing great. Their economy is roaring. Let's just copy Texas. Let's just do what they are doing. Well, and it's an attractive argument on the surface, but there's several things wrong with it. The first is you have to look at the rates in Texas. It's 0.7% for most businesses. It's 0.5% for retail businesses. So the Nevada proposal for a retail business is 4 times as much and almost 3 times as much for every other business. That's a significant distinction between the Texas tax and between here. Second, the tax hasn't worked well in Texas. The first year after it was enacted, there were over 100 bills in the legislature to repeal or modify the margins tax. It hasn't been well received. Even the current frontrunner to be governor, Greg Abbott, has said the Texas margin tax, is fundamentally flawed. And I don't think he's called for the outright repeal, but he recognizes it's just a really bad tax, regardless of how much money it brings in. Small businesses were especially had especially a hard time with the margin tax after it passed. The the National Federation of Independent Business Texas chapter did a survey of small business owners, and here's what they found. Many companies had their tax burden increased tenfold, and a survey showed that 40% of them saw an increase in their state tax liability of over 500%. And because money has to come from somewhere, another survey they did showed that 20% of small businesses in Texas had to lay off employees as a result of the margin tax in Texas. And remember, the margin tax in Texas is 3 times smaller than the proposed margin tax would be here. Another third reported they would leave jobs unfilled. 3% said they actually had to close their doors because of this tax, and 20% said they had to cut health insurance for their employees. So, Texas is doing well because of a lot of things. They, other than this, have a generally good tax climate. They've got a lot of energy there. That certainly helps, but you can't look at it and say, oh, it's the margin tax that made Texas great. That's simply not true. And another structural problem with the margin tax is that it will affect different industries differently. So if you are in an industry like farming, where there's a pretty good balance between labor and capital expenses, you're going to pay proportionally more of this tax. Now, if you're a lawyer and most of your expenses are personnel, well, even if you're running a $20 million shop, if you can deduct $19 million of your of it because it's payroll cost, well, then your proportion is going to be much smaller. And so what this shows is the different industries are paying significantly more proportional to their size in the economy. And again, this is another structural problem with the margin tax that is unrelated to how much money you think the government should collect, but just it's just not a good thing for a tax policy to have. Proponents will say that the margin tax is going to bring in $800 million every 2 years. That's a lot of money. The state budget is only about $6.5 billion every 2 years for the general fund. So why are we bringing in? Why do proponents want to bring in all this money to the state? Has anyone heard the reasons that we need to raise taxes? Education. That's it. That's what they say. The teachers union is behind it, and they say we need more money for education. And they say this money is going to go into the state's education account. That's true, and that's accurate. That's technically accurate, but there's an important thing to realize is that even though if this passes, all of the money will go into the state's education fund, there's nothing that prevents the state from taking money that they're currently allocating to the state's education fund and moving it to other legislative priorities. So while this money is earmarked towards education, there's no guarantee that education spending will increase. It could actually decrease even if the margin tax passes. But the larger policy point is spending more for education simply doesn't work. And how can I say that so confidently? It's because we've tried for 50 years. It's just amazing when you look at this, and that's one of the benefits of working for a think tank is you can actually go back and look at it. The top chart here is inflation-adjusted per pupil education spending in Nevada, the history of that. And why we want to do that is because, you know, if the population grows, and it certainly has grown here, especially in southern Nevada in the last 10 years, it makes sense that we would spend more on education. If there's more students, certainly makes sense. Inflation obviously is a factor. So we're going to remove those things and just say, how much are we spending in inflation-adjusted per pupil dollars? Well, in 1960, we were spending a little over $3,000 a student. 2009, we're spending almost $9,000 a student, and that doesn't include capital cost. It doesn't include some of the federal government money. It doesn't include debt service. So this is just current expenditures. And if you go back and look at testimony, if you go back and look at newspaper articles, we've got decades and decades of the education establishment saying we've got to spend more on education. We just have got to. Well, we have, and it just hasn't worked. And this bottom chart, this top chart is more important because it's an accurate comparison. But just to get a sense of how dramatic this has been, this is the numbers unadjusted for inflation. So 1960, we're spending $430 per pupil, and then we're spending close to $9,000. So if someone says, look, Nevada, we always rank at the bottom of the bad rankings, and we just don't spend enough on education, it's not because we haven't tried spending more. It's just that other states have done an even better job than we have of spending more on education. So, I mean, bottom line question is, has it worked? No, it absolutely has not worked. This is, sorry, and this is a lot of math, so I'm apologizing. This is just a scatter plot of states and their graduation rate. So how much they spent versus the graduation rate. And the reason I'm pulling this out, and I've got a couple more charts in a second, is that there was a story in the Las Vegas Sun where their education reporter said, look, there's a correlation between spending and graduation rates. And he took the top 24 states, because they didn't have data for all of them, so the top 24 states, and said, look, there are more of them that spend more than states that don't spend more. And you had liberal lawmakers saying, look, this is why we've got to spend more money on education. But then when you actually go back and do the math and not just cherry pick your numbers, you see that this line showing correlation, not even causation, correlation is virtually flat. And the biggest way you can tell this is, I mean, you've got all these states spending in the $9,000 range, and you've got states with 87% graduation rates to 63% graduation rates. So it matters more how you spend the money than how much money you're spending. And you can see that in a couple of other things. This is a reading and math scatter plots, and they show the same thing. If you do all the math, that this ends up being a 3% correlation between spending and reading achievement in the I think it's the 4th grade. And that's not even causation. That's correlation. Math is about 1.8%. So pop quiz time. How many principals has the Clark County School District fired in the last 30 years? Now, before you answer that, I want you to think about that Clark County in Nevada has the lowest graduation rate in the country, consistently ranked as one of the worst school districts in the country. So how many principals have been held accountable in 30 years? Anyone want to venture a guess who doesn't know the answer? Well, that's close. Two. We've had 2 principals fired. I mean, we have had accountability. We have had 30 years of failure, and my goodness, 2 people have been fired. And if you look at teachers, we fire about 1 in 1,000 teachers every year. So, and I'm not trying to. Yeah, go ahead. That absolutely is a factor. And the thing when you look at education is there are lots of factors. From a public policy perspective, you can't control parents. And so there are states like Florida that have done a good job of increasing student achievement, even with some of the same challenges that Nevada faces. So if there was an independent way to increase parent involvement, I absolutely agree. I think that would be a big boost to education. But the problem is, in terms of the margin tax very specifically, is that they say, look, we've got to spend more. If we spend more, we're going to get better results. And that's very appealing intuitively because we understand that, if we go to Lowry's instead of McDonald's, we're going to have a nicer meal. But in the Clark County School District, there's no competition. We aren't even getting turnover of teachers and principals. All we would do with any additional spending is spend more on the same system, on the same people, and we wouldn't even reward people based on merit. We would reward them for how long they've been there and how many degrees they have. And I think you guys know firsthand that there's a big, especially in the work that you guys do, there's a big causation between how hard you work, how good of a job you do, and how much you earn. But for a school teacher, that's not there. You want to earn more? Stick around for 20 years. If your colleague who's been there for 25 years is showing movies in their class every day, and you've only been there for 5 years, guess what? They're going to be making twice as much as you, and there's just nothing you can do about it. So, when people say, look, if we just spend more, we're going to have these great results, things are going to happen, I would say two things. One, we've tried it. 50 years of evidence is very clear. And the second thing is ask them to articulate what's going to be different with this additional money. And that's where they don't have anything. It's, well, another program, or we'll just hire more teachers, but there's no actual distinct difference. So we all know the goal, though. I mean, we all want students who graduate who are prepared for life, prepared for success. How do we get there? If we don't spend more, if that doesn't work, what's going to work? Well, I'd like to introduce you to the Soroki family, and they actually live in Indiana. And Indiana, a couple years ago, passed a statewide voucher program. Now, if you're not familiar with vouchers, it's a simple concept. It's called school choice, where instead of going to a school based on your zip code or your neighborhood or what school's there, the state takes the money they would spend on the public school, and almost all of the time it's less money than they would spend on the public school, and they give it to the parents and say, you pick a school that you think is best for your child. You find the school that's best for your child, and we'll pay a certain amount of money, $5,000 or $7,000 to that school. And so what that allows parents to do is it empowers them to say, all right, my kid's not just going to the school down the road. I'm going to go find the best school for my child. And we always talk about how children are unique, and that's absolutely true. Every child has unique gifts and talents. So if children are unique, why aren't we allowing their parents to pick the best schools for them? So let me introduce you to the mom, Patricia, and here's a letter she wrote after her daughter was involved in the school choice program. The Choice Scholarship Program has affected my daughter, Michaela, positively in every aspect of her life. Have you heard the phrase, what a difference a day makes? I'm modifying that to, what a difference a Choice Scholarship Program makes. Michaela is in the 7th grade this year at Trinity Lutheran School, and she has struggled both academically and behaviorally since about the 4th grade. Before the start of her 6th grade year, I checked out Trinity because we needed a different atmosphere. However, although I was very interested, the cost of tuition prevented me from even considering sending her there since my husband had been unemployed for 2.5 years. So I resigned and braced myself for her first year in middle school. Only by the grace of God did we make it through last year. For her last term in 6th grade, she was barely getting by academically. In contrast, on her October midterm grades report from Trinity Lutheran, she received an A+, 2 A's, 1 B+, and 4 B's. When Michaela brought home her grades, I could not stop looking at them. We even invited my sister over for the unveiling of her report card. Not only has the voucher program affected her grades, but her whole attitude. Last year, Michaela dreaded going to school. Now she can't wait to go to school. She even comments on the weekend that she wishes it was a school day. Last year, Michaela was bullied and didn't want to be involved in any extracurricular school activities. This year, she jumped right in and played on the soccer team and is in the handbell choir. Our children are our future. How could anyone oppose changing the life of a child, a family, and our world? Thank you to all who supported this program from the bottom of my heart, Patricia. So that's an overview of the margin tax. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'd certainly be happy to answer questions if I. Oh, excellent, yes.
How many employees do you have at Enfield?
We are an 11-person staff.
And what's the answer to parents though that don't? I mean, kids that don't have a parent that's willing to drive them somewhere to the school. What's the answer there?
Well,
that's what public schools are.
No, absolutely, and it is very important that every child succeeds. And what the really cool thing that we've seen with school choice around the country in states like Florida and DC and Milwaukee, where it's been around longer, is that researchers have gone in and they have found. Have done studies on the students who use the program, and 12 of the 13 studies have found those students have achieved a higher gain than the students who stayed in the public school. But what's really neat is they go back and they look at the public schools and that are now competing, because if a child is going to Trinity Lutheran, they're not going to the public school. That means the public school is not getting that money that they would have received. And so researchers have said, how does a school choice program affect the students who remain in public schools? And in 22 of 23 studies, they have found that those students actually did better, not as good as the students using the program, but better than they have been doing. So it actually benefits the students who remain in public schools, making it really a win-win. And those other studies showed no difference. They didn't show negative effects. So, yes.
Okay, two. One is, I'm assuming if it's this negative, that our state legislators wouldn't take care of this problem because of fear of retaliation to the teachers.
Well, they didn't vote on it, but the way it's well, but even if they had rejected it, it would have gone to the ballot. So the way the initiative process works, there was no way to prevent it from going to the ballot. So it's not something that they did.
Secondly, is there an attribution to the regarding the businesses? So let's say my current business was grossing $3 million, and I set up 4 LLCs and just ran it through each one to keep it under $1 million. Is there an attribution?
Yes, it is, and I think it's 50% ownership stake. So if you had a 50 plus 1% ownership stake in multiple businesses, they would all have to file under one return.
And what about if I had my kids own, each one of my 3 daughters own 10%, I own 40%, and my wife owns 30%?
I am not going to comment in any sort of legal authority. I think that would. I don't think the tax would apply then. But I'm going to caveat that as I'm not a tax attorney. Yes.
Some of the things, the things that I don't see in those studies, and don't get me wrong, I'm not defending the school system because my wife works for it, so please don't think that. But, if you take all the good kids, the parents who care about their kids, and you put them in a school, well, naturally they're going to do better because they don't have the other stuff there. It's kind of like, if you buy some blueberries and one is molded, and you leave them all in there, they're all going to get molded.
Well,
okay, and this is what's going on. And when I say yes, parent participation, I'm telling you at these at-risk schools, and I'm not defending every teacher, but I know what goes on at my wife's school. They're working their buns off, and the parents don't care. And we continue to discount that and blame the system. That's not the system's fault that the parents don't care.
Yeah. Well, and I
don't get me wrong.
No.
I think there's a lot of flaws with the system.
I certainly understand what you're saying, and again, what I would come back to is that idea that where the school choice programs have been into effect, the kids in the public school actually did better. So there was a net improvement. And it's more of a focus on, what can the lawmakers, what can the state government control? There's no way to pass a law mandating parental involvement. But what you can do is for the parents in those schools who are interested, and I would submit that some of them are interested, but they have been told no so many times that they get burned out. Not all of them, and there's no way to speak in totalities.
The grades in Green Valley and the education percentage is higher in Green Valley than it will be in North Las Vegas.
Absolutely.
It always will be. Yeah. And we don't hear that. That's what the studies don't talk about.
Well, what I would say is the studies do talk about that when they talk about kids leaving, and you look at some of the Milwaukee studies that are inner city schools, and those kids are doing better. You look at what's happened in Washington D.C., which is just the worst education system in the entire country. The kids that are pulled out of those those systems are doing better. So it's never, I can't get up here and say, look, it's this one program that's going to fix everything. If you could fix parental involvement, I absolutely agree with you. If you could help every kid learn English, I absolutely agree with you. That would be a factor. But from a public policy perspective, the state can't control those things. But what we can do is empower parents to choose schools and encourage them to say, look, now you've got some direct control. So that's the thing. I think there was, sorry.
There's a question. I'll pass around the mic.
Is there any public policy consideration to providing new education revenue besides taxing small businesses, perhaps sales tax, property tax?
In terms of what's happening on the ballot, it's just going to be, it's just going to be this. This is going to be up for a yes or no vote. In the last legislative sessions, there's been talk of kind of restructuring the tax structure, but honestly, I don't think it's going to go. It's going to go anywhere.
Decided to make small business pay for the education community.
But yes, that's what the NEA or the NSEA decided to do. That's the measure they wanted to put on the ballot.
At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned a website where they give the employees' salaries. Could you repeat that?
That's transparentnevada.com. And you're welcome.
Mine is just a comment and question too. Last legislature session, they passed medical marijuana. And what's your opinion on the passing that next one for the recreation, because it was being about $500 million and help that?
Well, in terms of medical marijuana, we haven't taken a position, and one of the things we do as a public policy organization is recognize there's a lot of important issues out there, from social issues to foreign policy, and we limit ourselves to certain issues. And so medical marijuana is an important issue, very important issue, just not one that we've commented on. And the other thing I would say in terms of more money for education is more money is not going to fix education. We've got to have the structural reform. We've got to allow the parents to choose what school their students go to. That's going to be the only thing that's going to fix education. I think we've got 50 years of evidence that spending more doesn't work.
Do you have some kind of a program for parents and teachers at the moment or in the future? Because of the changing population profile, I think there is a need for parents to get some involvement in the schools.
We have not done anything in terms of trying to encourage parental involvement. Certainly think that's very important. Just as a public policy research organization, it's a bit outside of our limited mission, but yeah, it is. It's a very important thing. Absolutely. I know. Sorry, he just had his hand up for a long time.
One last question.
I was just going to ask: would casinos be subject to the 2% tax on all?
They are not the gaming revenue. The gaming revenue already pays a gross receipts tax, and so the non-gaming revenue from the hotels, from their entertainment, that would all be subject to the 2% tax.
So, Victor, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.